It is 7:44 a.m. The East China Sea, 31 nautical miles northwest of the Senkaku Islands. The uninhabited rock formations that Japan administers, that China claims, that the United States has explicitly and repeatedly stated fall under the mutual defense provisions of the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty, and that the People's Liberation Army has spent the better part of a decade treating as a proving ground for the kind of gray zone coercion that Beijing has calculated can shift territorial facts without triggering the military response that a direct attack would require. The sky at this hour is clear and blue, with the particular crystalline quality of East China Sea mornings in autumn. Good visibility, light wind from the northeast at 12 knots, sea state 2. A beautiful morning by any measure, and a morning that has been chosen deliberately for what is about to happen, because clear skies and calm seas mean good footage, and footage is part of the mission. USS Milius DDG-69 is conducting a freedom of navigation transit on a heading of 150, speed 15 knots, in international waters where she has every legal right to be and where her presence is, in the institutional language of the United States Navy, a routine assertion of navigational rights that requires no special justification and no apology to any nation. She has been in this area for 6 hours. Her crew has been at modified watch condition since she entered the operational zone at 0130. Not because anything threatening had happened, but because operating within 50 nautical miles of Chinese claimed features in the East China Sea is an environment that rewards heightened attention and punishes complacency. The commanding officer of USS Milius has been in the Navy for 21 years. He has made this kind of transit before. He knows exactly what to expect. At 7:44 a.m., the AN/SPY-1D radar aboard USS Milius detected 2 new air contacts departing the Chinese coast from Wenzhou Air Base, bearing 310, range 180 nautical miles, climbing through 15,000 feet, and accelerating. The contact classification took the electronic warfare officer 44 seconds. The Su-30 MKK derivative radar emission profile, the specific variant of the Russian-designed radar that China produces domestically under license as the Type 1493, was in the classified threat library and was unambiguous. The 2 contacts were J-16 flanker derivative strike fighters, carrying what the EW suite assessed as a full air-to-surface weapons load based on the radar emission characteristics associated with active targeting systems. 2 aircraft, bearing 310, closing at approximately 500 knots. J-16 fighters on a direct intercept vector toward a U.S. Navy destroyer in the East China Sea is not a novel situation. China has conducted aggressive intercepts of American military aircraft and ships in this region with enough regularity that 5th Fleet and 7th Fleet have developed specific response protocols, communication procedures, and documentation requirements for exactly this kind of encounter. What makes this morning different from the previous intercepts in the pattern is a second contact picture that developed on the surface radar simultaneously with the air contact detection. At 7:46 a.m., 2 minutes after the J-16s were detected, USS Milius's surface search radar painted 3 new contacts on the surface, bearing 295, range 87 nautical miles, closing at 28 knots. The contact classification was completed by 7:52 a.m. 2 Type 05 2D. Luoyang 3 class guided missile destroyers, and 1 Type 054 A Zhangkai 2 class frigate. All 3 planned surface combatants, all 3 closing on Milius from the west in a formation geometry that, projected forward at current course and speed, would bring them to within approximately 8 nautical miles of the American destroyer in approximately 3 hours and 6 minutes. 3 surface combatants and 2 strike fighters converging simultaneously on a single American destroyer from different vectors. The geometry was coordinated. The timing was not coincidental. Somebody had planned this operation with enough lead time to position the surface group 87 nautical miles west while vectoring the fighters from Wenzhou, and had timed their approaches to arrive simultaneously, the fighters overhead while the surface group was still outside engagement range, creating a dual domain pressure that was designed to present USS Milius's commanding officer with a visual and radar picture that communicated one message with complete clarity: leave. This is the logic of Chinese gray zone operations in the East China Sea. The objective is not to sink USS Milius. Sinking USS Milius would trigger exactly the military response that China's strategy is designed to avoid. The objective is to create a confrontation that is uncomfortable enough, threatening enough, visually dramatic enough that the commanding officer of the American ship makes a decision, any decision, that can be characterized as retreat, a course alteration, a speed reduction, a deviation from the declared transit track. Anything. Because anything in the footage that the plan's own ships and aircraft are recording can be edited and narrated into evidence that American freedom of navigation in the East China Sea is not, in practice, free. USS Milius's commanding officer read the tactical picture at 7:53 a.m. He had been on the bridge since 7:30 and in the CIC since 7:48 when the first air contacts appeared. He looked at the combined picture: 2 J-16 inbound at altitude, 3 planned surface combatants inbound from the west, for a period his TAO later described as lasting approximately 10 seconds. Then he said 3 things in sequence. First, battle stations. Second, get me 7th Fleet. Third, do not, repeat, do not alter course. The ship went to battle stations with the organized efficiency of a crew that has drilled this sequence until it is faster than thought. The CIC filled to full combat manning in under 4 minutes. The Aegis combat system came to full operational readiness. Every weapon system aboard USS Milius was hot, tracked, and ready. And the commanding officer's third instruction, do not alter course, was the decision that everything else this morning would be built on. Because the course was the story. The course was the assertion. The course was the point. At 7:58 a.m., the 2 J-16s reached a position 60 nautical miles north of USS Milius and began a descent from cruise altitude. They were not descending to attack altitude, a fact that the EW suite confirmed by the absence of any fire control radar activation. They were descending to intercept altitude, the 2,000 to 5,000 foot range, where fighter aircraft conducting harassment intercepts position themselves to be visible, audible, and psychologically present to the crew of the vessel they are approaching. The maneuver is scripted. PL/AAF aircrews have conducted this type of intercept against American ships and aircraft dozens of times. The script calls for close approaches, simulated weapons employment gestures, such as activating targeting radar in a brief, pointed burst, and radio transmissions on the International Emergency Frequency, demanding that the American vessel leave what China characterizes as its territorial waters. The script was about to encounter something it was not written to handle. At 7:59 a.m., USS Milius received a 7th Fleet communication that confirmed what her commanding officer had already requested. 2 F-35C Lightning IIs from Carrier Air Wing 5 embarked aboard USS Ronald Reagan, operating 280 nautical miles to the east, had been launched 34 minutes ago and were currently inbound to the Senkaku operating area at supersonic speed. Their estimated time of arrival, 18 minutes. They were not squawking. They were not transmitting. Their radar was in passive collection mode. To every sensor the J-16s were operating, the F-35C Lightning IIs did not exist. The commanding officer of USS Milius acknowledged the communication. He looked at the tactical display. The J-16s were at 42 nautical miles, descending through 8,000 feet. The planned surface group was at 79 nautical miles and closing steadily. He picked up the radio handset connected to the ship's Channel 16 transmitter and passed it to his senior communications watch officer with a single instruction. Standard warning. Site UNCOS. Twice. Then we're done talking. The transmission was made at 8:02 a.m. It identified USS Milius by name, stated her position in international waters, cited the applicable provisions of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea regarding freedom of navigation, and noted that any aircraft approaching within 500 feet of a United States Navy warship without prior coordination would be considered a safety hazard under ICAO regulations and documented accordingly. The message was calm. It was transmitted in English. It was transmitted once more at 8:04 a.m. Then the radio went quiet. The J-16s reached a position 8 nautical miles north of USS Milius at 8:09 a.m. and established a racetrack orbit that brought them repeatedly across the destroyer's bow at altitudes between 1,500 and 3,000 feet. The first pass was at 8:11 a.m., a single J-16 descending to 1,500 feet, crossing USS Milius's bow at a distance of approximately 1,200 meters. After burner lit, the acoustic signature of the AL-31F engines clearly audible to every crew member on the weather decks. It was a display. A deliberate, calibrated intimidation display designed to make an impression. The PLAAF pilot who flew it was good. The maneuver was precise. USS Milius held course. She held speed. Her 5-inch Mark 45 gun mount was not slewed toward the aircraft. Her Phalanx C IWS remained in standby. Nothing aboard the ship communicated anything except steady, professional indifference to the display overhead. The second J-16 made its pass at 8:13 a.m., lower, 1,200 feet, and closer. The wingtip distance from USS Milius's superstructure as the fighter crossed the bow was later estimated from the ship's own camera footage at approximately 700 meters. The EW suite registered a 2-second burst of the J-16's fire control radar, a targeting ping pointed at the ship, designed to trigger the radar warning receivers and communicate the message that a weapons lock was being simulated. The ping was logged with timestamp and frequency data. The EW officer reported it to the TAO. The TAO reported it to the commanding officer. The commanding officer's response, as recorded in the bridge audio log, was logged. At 8:17 a.m., the F-35Cs arrived. They did not announce their arrival by radio. They did not activate their radar. They appeared in the airspace above the J-16s at 28,000 feet, positioned directly above the PLAAF aircraft's racetrack orbit pattern, as two contacts that materialized without warning on USS Milius's own radar display. From the Milius CIC's perspective, they had always been there. From the J-16 crew's perspective, they did not exist until one of the J-16 pilots, banking through the western turn of his racetrack orbit, happened to look up and see, at approximately 28,000 feet and slightly to the north, two aircraft that were not commercial traffic and were not anything his radar was showing him. The F-35C's radar cross-section, as seen from below and forward by a J-16 pilot looking up with the naked eye, versus what a Type 1 493 radar can detect at 10 miles in a clear atmosphere, is the operational definition of an asymmetric advantage. The J-16 pilot could see, visually, that there were aircraft above him. His radar was not showing them. His electronic warfare receivers were not detecting their emissions. Whatever was up there was present without being electronically visible, which is the most unsettling possible combination for a combat pilot. Because a threat you can see but cannot track is a threat you cannot engage or evade with any confidence. The F-35C lead pilot activated her IFF transponder at 8:17:44 a.m. The transponder signal was squawking the correct U.S. military mode code, and it was received by USS Milius's Aegis system instantly. In the CIC, the two F-35C contacts were now marked with the blue friendly symbol. From the J-16 crew's electromagnetic picture, the two aircraft had just appeared from nowhere, squawking U.S. military codes at altitude, in a position geometrically above and behind both J-16Es. At 8:18 a.m., the F-35C lead pilot activated her AN/APG-81 radar in a single, brief, low-power pulse directed at the lead J-16. The pulse lasted 0.4 seconds. In those 0.4 seconds, the J-16's radar warning receiver registered an AN/APG-81 emission, the specific frequency agile signature of the F-35's fire control radar, from a bearing of approximately 015 elevation high. The bearing was directly behind and above the lead J-16's current position. The range, which the radar warning receiver could estimate from the signal strength, was approximately 9 nautical miles. 9 nautical miles, directly above and behind. A N/APG-81 fire control radar. Brief pulse. In the universal language of aerial combat, that signal has one meaning. I have had a fire control solution on you for longer than you know, and I am choosing this moment to tell you. The lead J-16 pilot broke off his racetrack orbit at 8:18:11 a.m., 27 seconds after the F-35Cs activated their IFF. He turned north, climbing, accelerating toward cruise altitude. His wingman, reading the situation from the electromagnetic data without needing a radio call to understand what had happened, broke simultaneously and followed. Both aircraft were climbing through 15,000 feet by 8:19:30 a.m., north-northwest bound, opening from USS Milius's position at 400 knots. The Planned Surface Group, which had been monitoring the intercept on its own radar systems and was now watching the J-16s depart the operating area at high speed without having accomplished anything visible, reached 67 nautical miles from USS Milius at 8:22 a.m. and altered course 15 degrees to the north. The course change was subtle, not a dramatic reversal, not an obvious retreat, but the geometry told the story clearly. The surface group was no longer on an approach heading toward the American destroyer. It was on a parallel heading that would keep it at roughly the current distance rather than continuing to close. The planned surface group had blinked without making physical contact. The J-16s had broken off without completing their harassment sequence. USS Milius had not altered course by a single degree. In the CIC, the commanding officer watched the contact picture resolve on his display. J-16s opening to the north-northwest. Planned surface group on a non-closing heading to the northwest. USS Milius steady on 150 at 15 knots. The Senkakus 31 miles to the southeast. The East China Sea blue and bright in the morning light. He authorized a stand down from battle stations at 8:31 a.m., not because the threat was certainly over, but because the tactical picture had stabilized, and holding a crew at battle stations beyond the duration of an active threat degrades the readiness they will need if another threat materializes. He called 7th Fleet with a brief situation report. He thanked the F-35C crew via 7th Fleet relay, since the F-35Cs were already heading back to the Reagan for their support. Then he went to the wardroom and got coffee. The F-35C had not fired a weapon. It had not threatened to fire a weapon. It had activated a radar for 0.4 seconds and revealed its presence in a geometry that communicated in the most precise and unambiguous terms available to the physics of aerial combat that the J-16s had been operating inside a lethal engagement envelope for an unknown period of time without knowing it. That revelation, that 27-second gap between the F-35C IFF activation and the J-16 breakoff, is the operational definition of what fifth-generation airpower means in a gray zone context. Not the ability to destroy. The ability to make destruction feel so close and so certain that the adversary makes the rational choice to avoid it. The J-16 is China's most capable operational strike fighter. It is a genuine fourth-generation plus aircraft with a modern AESA radar, a sophisticated electronic warfare suite, and an impressive air-to-surface weapons capacity. Its crews are trained to professional standards that the PLAAF has worked hard to develop over 2 decades of sustained modernization. The J-16 that made that 700-meter bow crossing of USS Milius this morning was flown by a pilot who knew what he was doing and was doing it with real skill. That pilot's radar never showed the F-35Cs. Not once. Not at any point during the 31 minutes the F-35Cs were in the operational area. Not when they were 15 miles away. Not when they were 9 miles away. Not when they were directly above him at 28,000 feet with an unobstructed radar line of sight to his aircraft. The AN/APG-77 and APG-81 family of radars, with their low probability-of-intercept waveforms and their ability to build a fire control quality track on a target, while emitting at power levels and frequencies that the target's radar warning receiver does not flag as a threat, represent a technological advantage over the J-16s Type 1493 that cannot be closed by training harder or flying more aggressively. It is a gap in the physics of the systems, and physics does not negotiate. USS Milius completed her freedom of navigation transit and departed the Senkaku operating area on schedule at 1:15 p.m. The complete sensor record of the encounter, radar tracks, EW emissions data, camera footage, the 0.4-second AN/APG-81 pulse, and the J-16's 27-second response time was packaged and transmitted to 7th Fleet Intelligence before the ship cleared the area. Analysts in Yokosuka and Pearl Harbor spent the following week building a detailed profile of the Plan-Coordinated Harassment Doctrine based on the morning's data. The surface group positioning, the fighter timing, the intercept profile parameters, the precise moment of breakoff, and what triggered it. All of it would be used. All of it would inform the next transit, and the next one, and the one after that. Because the East China Sea does not belong to China, and the United States Navy is going to keep demonstrating that fact on whatever schedule the operational commanders determine appropriate, with whatever assets the theater requires, until the message has been received clearly enough that the harassment stops, or until the capability gap between what China can intercept and what America can deploy makes the harassment operationally pointless, regardless of how frequently it is attempted. USS Milius held course. The J-16s went home. The F-35Cs went back to the Reagan. The East China Sea was exactly what it was this morning and will be tomorrow. International waters, freely navigated by the United States Navy. Bye for now.